need to rent some heavy equipment, like a skid steer loader or a Terramite backhoe, or just make sure you know where your utilities are before you start playing around with that stuff. Ask me how I know.
If you're going to rent a backhoe, then you guess you should talk about an addition to the screen porch.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Operations Manager for TDS Custom Construction, Ian Schwant.
How you doing, Patrick?
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director, Andrew Zellner.
Hey, Patrick.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it's a pleasure to see you guys this morning. How are you all?
Doing good.
What have you been working on, Ian? You got that screen porch done yet?
No, we started on it last weekend. My father-in-law and I, we started putting down what will be the cedar frame for it that'll hold the screenies. So we'll keep cracking at it weekends.
So is
here
the
and
cedar
there.
part like a guardrail too, or is it just meant to hold the screen panels?
It's meant to hold the screen panels, but I attached them to the deck framing standing up, so then it makes kind of a nice kick plate so that you don't walk up to the screen and
put your foot through it.
Put your foot through it. So, but yeah, we only had like 20-mile-an-hour winds hitting the deck, so it wasn't that bad. But it was like 100% humidity and 60 degrees, so it was typical April Midwest weather.
I heard it's not all been good.
Yeah, no, we got some snow last week. I would assume Andrew got a little bit of that too.
Yeah, we, I think on Friday we may have gotten like a bunch of hail, like real like, I don't know, marble-sized hail, but like nice, perfectly round pieces of hail. It's been a while since I've seen that.
Did it mess up your car?
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, like that's Listen, big enough to do some serious damage.
The car lives in the driveway. I was more concerned about my aging garage and my tools inside of it, and those are all fine.
I think the first time I can recall as a child seeing fear in my dad's eyes was like being in some big box store and hearing the hail hitting the roof of it, and him knowing that their recently purchased new van was out in the parking lot getting pelted.
Well, I think it's a harbinger sometimes of tornadoes too, right? Yeah, I would totally be scared about that too.
Yeah, the other thing that I did since I talked to you last was I sat in on that estimating class at Madison College's construction program, and just wanted to give a shout out to that group, and really got some good questions from John's class, and really enjoyed being part of it.
Can you tell us more? Like, did you talk to any of the students? What's their motivation for being in the program?
Seems like it's an equal amount of career changers and just young people who are interested in doing something that doesn't require 4 years of going to school and want to work with their hands. And it was really great to be there and see that they were doing similar estimating tasks to what I was, using very similar style spreadsheets. So it was pretty interesting, the crossover between real world industry stuff and what they're being taught in class.
I think you'd agree that part of estimating is subjective. How do you teach those skills?
It was really focused on teaching them to break it down and look at things parsed out into cost codes, and understanding what general requirements are, and the things that get missed, and also being able to quantify how fast it might take your crew to build a wall.
That seems like the really hard part, especially now.
They did an exercise where they timed people building 8-foot section of wall, which I thought was really great. It gives you a starting point, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really cool. So you're going to do that again, you figure?
Yeah, I hope to. I think
Cool.
the program ends in the month of May, so I snuck in right at the end to sit in on that class and speak. And we've already hired one student out of that class that is graduating in May.
Wow. That's got to be satisfying for them, right?
Yeah.
Andrew, you and I went to Pro Talk Live in Portland, Oregon. What'd you think?
I thought it was a great event. The speakers were all fantastic. After every speaker, I had, an epiphany like, I got to quit my job and go frame houses with Tim, and work with Brian. I got to move to Portland and do, insulation retrofits. It was. I thought it was a good event. I'm glad we recorded those, and we'll be making those available at some point coming up here. And then, Patrick, it's always like the other thing is just getting to see the people I work with in person is like. It's like always a surprise, but it's like so nice to spend time with real people instead of computer screens.
Agreed.
That was probably the biggest highlight for me.
I'm always reminded when we do these kind of things for the brand is how amazing our tribe of folks are, and people who just want to do a good job building houses. Boy, that's there's so much more attention in the mainstream media and how builders are crooks, remodelers are crooks. These are people who are trying to take your money and get away with something, and that's just not always the case.
Don't forget unintelligent crooks because
Right.
we didn't go to school.
Yeah. Without exception, all the people we met were nice and smart and trying to do a good job. We had a chance to see Josh Salinger's Passive House project, Ian, and they're building houses to solve the carbon problem, which I find very interesting. I think that's perhaps the most noble of home building exercises now.
Josh's business is really interesting. Like there's, he would talk very candidly about, it wasn't always this great and, maybe having lost the business a couple of times. But sort of once he's got a mission behind his business and like folks find him and seek him out because of that mission. And, and he's like not looking to get too big and, he's turning down a lot of work. But he's like very intentional about the kind of business he has, and how many houses he can build without killing his crew and without having to expand too much. And it's really interesting. Bunch of content coming in Fine Homebuilding magazine in the next year too from Josh. So looking forward to sharing more of that.
A tour of something that he built. I think it was issue 306. Like looked kind of like a compound of buildings. I think that was Josh.
Yep. Yeah, that was, it was a big urban infill lot that they designed a bunch of shared housing, single family and duplex housing around shared green space and parking space, but still some privacy and seclusion.
We also heard from Tim and Brian Euler, their company Pioneer Builders in Port Orchard, Washington. Tim was talking about how to, be a framer for decades without killing yourself. And Brian was talking about the pressures of selling spec houses and how to do that and make a living and build a good house, which, some folks think that's mutually exclusive, but they've proven it doesn't have to be. And Lindsay Shack was teaching us how to pull off a high performance build and get the most from your team and make it work so it's not adversarial. All super good content. It was a pleasure to be a part of, for sure.
The other thing I left with was wanting to get on the high pressure air compressor air gun train.
So for those of you who don't know, Max, the Japanese pneumatic tool company, has a high powered system and matching compressor, and the compressor is an amazing piece of gear, but I think it costs like $1,500 or $2,000. Yeah, but it's sweet, super quiet. And then the great part about it is the gun is much smaller. Like a framing gun is about the size of a siding nailer.
Wow.
Yeah. You ever
And
seen
you
this
can
stuff?
shoot nails into concrete.
And you
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
If I look it up, I'll want to buy one.
You're going to want to buy one
Yeah.
for sure. Well, Jeff, do you have anything to share about your place with spring coming?
Oh, just moving a lot of material, a lot of mulch, a lot of dirt.
Did you get a big delivery of mulch? Is that how you did it?
Well, I just 27 bags that I just brought home. That's the first batch. And then 20 yards of dirt.
Wow. I sold the lawn tractor to my neighbor, and my neighbor is using it quite a bit to move his mulch around, and I think that's a delight. I always know when it starts, right? Because I've been living with it for 10 years, so.
I was wondering if you were going to say you're scared every time that you see him using it, that it's just going to break down in his yard.
Boy, it's a little stressful selling something like that to your neighbor, right? It's like, I think he's gotten enough hours out of it now that if it broke tomorrow, I would be off the hook. Yeah. But I used my Makita push mower for the first time this past weekend, and the only thing I can say about it is it's unremarkable, except it's so quiet. It just works like it's supposed to. Yeah, it's totally fine.
Does your mower have lights on the front?
No, it doesn't.
My Ryobi has lights on the front, and so
Are
like
you trying to make me feel bad?
No, I joke about like it's so quiet I could get up in the middle of the night with the lights and mow the lawn, you know, if I can't sleep.
It's really cool, right? That's an amazing feature.
Yeah.
I won't bore y'all with tales of working on my rusty vehicles, but I put new brake lines on the back of my truck over the weekend, and just suffice to say is I can barely move this week.
Wow.
I've tried this before and had little success, but what I learned the problem was I was using the wrong tubing. I tried to get this fancy tubing, nickel copper alloy, and then stainless, and none of them would work in my flaring tool. And when I got the cheap steel brake line, then everything worked just like it was supposed to, first try. So if any of you attempt to make your own brake lines, reuse the fittings if you can from the original equipment, and then use the steel brake line, and I bet you won't have any trouble. So, as always, we heard from our listeners with some great feedback. This comes from our friend Dack. He says, Wisconsin tour. Cities include wherever Hans lives, Iron Ridge, Spring Green for Amber Westerman's recently featured net zero build. Live audience, maybe consider changing the name I came up with, Dack. So is it going to happen, Andrew? Are you arranging the house tour?
I'm trying to arrange the house tour. I reached out to Hans, and he lives in central Wisconsin, not too far away from where I grew up. Spring Green is an awesome city. You know, not only does Amber Westerman have a net zero build there, it's where the House on the Rock is, which is another building science anomaly.
You'll have to tell us about that.
So the House on the Rock is like a Wisconsin oddity. I don't know the full story, but an eccentric guy built a house on top of a rock. It's got like some weird, crazy features. A big, I think it's called like the sky deck or something, but
Something like that, but it cantilevers out.
a giant cantilever over a valley. And then he also collected all kinds of crazy stuff. So like the grounds are filled with, an old carousel, a bunch of doll houses, weird old cars. I mean, it's like, I like, it's a thing you go to as a child and you're like, this is crazy. And you go as an adult and you're like, this is absolutely insane. It's
It sounds perfect.
yeah.
There's some local legend stuff too between that guy that built it getting in some fight with Frank Lloyd Wright, and that's why he built that house, and something about that guy being an amateur architect, and Wright scoffed at what he was seeking to do.
I think it sounds amazing. So I don't know. I kind of like Wisconsin tour. So if any listeners have a better suggestion, we're open to them.
I think I'm just going to have to practice pronouncing Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
It'd be a pretty good loop. You could hit central Wisconsin for Hans and then stop at my house and then Spring Green and head back. It'd be a good loop for you.
I wish we'd have bought the podcast van we talked about a few years ago.
Wow.
I don't know if you saw photos of that, Andrew, but that was quite the rig. The purple podcast van.
Well, maybe it's still on the market.
We heard more about the Wisconsin blower door situation here. This comes from Charles. Hey, folks, I love the show. I'm simultaneously keeping current on new episodes and working my way backward in the sequence of past shows. The podcast inspired me to upgrade to an all-access membership after years of print subscribing. Yay!
Thanks, Charles.
Yeah. Like Andrew, I live in Minneapolis. Hearing about his interest in blower door tests in 453, I wanted to pass along a resource here in town. The Center for Energy and the Environment's Home Energy Squad will do a basic but decent energy review for $100. Importantly, this includes a blower door test as well as an infrared camera shots. I completed one of these 10 years ago and scheduled a follow-up visit for this June. They'll give you various efficiency products, but let's be honest, we're here for the ACH 50 stats. The program is sponsored by local utilities. While I don't know who I'd hire to complete a standalone test, I'm guessing it would run more than $100. I live in a 1939 1.5-story house in South Minneapolis that I bought 16 years ago. We've done a variety of projects since moving in, both ourselves and by hiring professionals. Our biggest project was about 8 years ago, included a gut remodel of our half-story attic, including spray foam of the roof deck and walls as well as our basement rim joist. Someone did a lousy job finishing the space in the 1960s, so it was rewarding to fix it up. We kept it semi-affordable by doing the flooring, trim, and painting ourselves. Combined with the new HVAC system, we use about 40% less energy in the house than we did before the project. My first pre-project blower door test was an eye-popping 8.5 air changes per hour, so I'm really looking forward to an updated test, which is scheduled in June. The rafters are measly 2x4s. There isn't an astonishing R value, but the comfort difference from air sealing has been huge. I also appreciate Andrew's mention of zoning changes in Minneapolis in 445. I don't work in home construction, but I do work in urban planning, mostly transportation. My interest is my building relates to a dream of retiring to a high-performance ADU overlooking the creek next to my house above a new garage and shop space. While projects like ADUs could increase building supply, I fear current construction costs will keep them out of reach for most. On top of this, there's no data that whether a rental market exists to fund these, which is critical to secure financing for their construction. Maybe it works in a high-end market like Greenwich, but in those cases, money may not be an issue. At best, they require high rent, which defaults to the point of adding them to increase supply. The consequence is that the benefit of high building performance is limited to suburban and rural areas where societal benefits of building efficiently are offset by burning thousands of gallons of transportation fuels that accompany this land use. Transportation is overtaking buildings as the single largest source of greenhouse gases, so hopefully more folks can adapt greener transportation modes like EVs, like Ian has. Still, it's frustrating that places with an inherent transportation efficiency advantage will have home comfort and performance remain out of reach. Wow, that is a good letter, Charles. Thank you. What do you guys think of that? That's
So I'm familiar with the Center for Energy and Environment. I didn't know their efficiency services included a blower door test, but that's very enticing.
$100, come on.
$100, yeah. Randy Williams also reached out. Minneapolis is the closest international airport to him, and he's coming down sometime in May. So he may also be interested in doing a blower door test with me. So I'm aiming for sometime this spring to get that test done, and to also be shocked, having eye-popping air changes per hour.
I bet it's going to be similar, right? The vintage and style of construction are similar, right?
Yeah, I mean, my house was built 40 years before his, but I feel like I've done a little bit of air sealing, but you never know until you test, right?
Well, I was also wanted to touch a little bit about the concept that just because you make ADUs legal in zoning doesn't mean they're going to be built because of the cost, which is makes perfect sense, right?
I mean, I would also love to retire with Charles to a building overlooking the creek with a garage and shop space.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And rent your house out to have income. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about this, Ian?
I was just going to mention that the idea that because there's a bunch of old housing stock in cities, like building new is also not usually an option. And so figuring out how to energy retrofit affordably and sustainably is, I feel like, a bigger piece of the pie than building new high performance housing.
Because there's just so much more of it, Andrew?
There's so much more of it, and fixing something that's already built is more often than not more or better for your carbon footprint.
And old homes, I think most people would agree, are the energy hogs of the built environment, right? Compared to even the lamest built new home, I'm guessing many old homes are way worse.
Yeah.
This comes from CB. Hey, podcast crew, just listen to 451. Thanks for getting my question regarding a basement garage. Great points about treating it as an outside space. However, the team didn't address my real question, which was about design and livability. I'm still not sure it's the best route in that respect. I also want to share some feedback on your comment regarding ground source heat pumps. I think you were too dismissive. I've researched this option a lot, and I'm going with a dandelion geothermal system. I realized there have been many poor performing geothermal systems, but I think this is due to poor system design or ignoring the building envelope. Properly designed ground source is very cost effective and far better than air source heat pumps. Please review this and consider clarifying with your listeners. Cheers, CB. I am going to keep my flag in the ground that if you have a low load building, ground source heat pump is really not the way to go just because of the cost. And I would say if you took that money that you spent on a ground source heat pump and made it into improvements with the building envelope, you're going to be further ahead, especially when it comes to resilience when you have a power interruption or what have you. You guys are notably quiet. You're not going to get way in on this. You're going to let me take take the fall for.
I'll stand with Jan and Patrick. I don't think they make sense because of the cost, and even the link that was included in this letter comes from a place that sells them. So of course the data is going to look favorable to them.
I think it makes a lot of sense for schools and much bigger structures that residents. Yeah, I have to be convinced otherwise. This comes from Kyle. His original question was in 451. I just listened to the episode and really appreciate the thoughts of everyone. He was asking whether he should get a ground source heat pump or go with a 10 kilowatt PV array. Since our initial conversation, I was able to speak with a local PV installer. I received a quote for a 10 kilowatt system with SunPower panels that the installer estimated would cover 83% of our power needs with an all-electric home and 7,000 miles per year on our Tesla. The cost was $27,000 installed, and the federal tax incentive, after the federal tax incentive, we are awaiting our plan completion and project estimate before we jump. We really want the PV, and I may have finally talked my wife into maybe going a little less on some finishes and spend that money on the PV and bones of the house. The air barrier option that was suggested is something I will look into. I'm trying to walk the fine line of not being a pain to my professional builder, but also advocating for myself and family. I don't want to force the builder into practices they aren't comfortable with, but I also want to push against the let it breathe approach that a few builders have mentioned when we interviewed them. Thanks, Kyle. So I think that's the right way to go, Kyle. The PV system is going to work for decades without any maintenance, and you can't fuel your car with a ground source heat pump.
Yeah, we just priced our PV system for our pole barn build that we're going to do this fall because I want to sneak it in while the tax incentive is still good yet. I'm surprised the difference in price for similar systems from Wisconsin to Kansas.
Here's more on that subject. This comes from excuse me, that's the deal on the ground source heat pump. So I mean, folks out there, if you have these systems, I would love to hear your experience. What do they cost to run? How has it been commissioning them? GBA has reported on some problems, but you often hear about the problems and you don't hear about the ones that work. So if folks have experience with successful ground source heat pumps, I would love to hear about it.
I also think the balancing finishes and like long-term energy in a new build is interesting. And Ian, I'm wondering, have you replaced any of the finishes in your house yet?
No, but I still have my painted concrete floor in the basement, which keeps getting pushed further and further down our list of things we're going to do anything about, to where Sarah and I are like, it's fine, whatever, doesn't bother us. When you start to price things like LVT flooring and you get up to $4,000 of flooring material, it's like, there's other stuff we can do with that. So it's amazing what we as humans can learn to live with pretty quickly and not have bother you in terms of finishes in your environment. But for us, the PV is a no-brainer.
It's like it reminds you that what's really important,
Yeah, the interesting thing, and I'm sure Kyle ran into it in Kansas, is because of the way that my utility does the net metering, I have to be very careful not to build a system bigger than I need because of how little they'll pay me for my overproduced electricity. I think it's like 4 cents a kilowatt, as opposed to the 13.5 cents I'm paying them, or getting canceled out by producing the PV.
I don't think I knew that you had a electric car. Is that in the future or is that
No,
presently?
that's the Volt that I have, the plug-in hybrid.
Okay.
So I have a 2012 Volt, and it plugs in. I get maybe 31 to 34 miles on the battery in a good day, and then I can plug it in at work. So on my 110-mile round trip to work, I can get as much as 68, 65 miles on battery, which has been pretty great.
That's cool. And when you're charging it with PV, even better.
Yeah, but it was interesting to see the way that the PV rep talked about the energy curve of when the PV is producing versus when my Mitsubishis are really sucking power to heat the house and air condition the house. So it ends up being at about 80% of my electric use, like Kyle mentioned. And I think my system's going to be a 7 kW system instead of a 10.
Have you researched it enough to know how much of your total price will be covered by the federal incentives?
Yeah, so the total cost of our system, I think, is about $18,000. So we'll get whatever that is, $7,000 back as a tax credit. But our installer here hooked us up with a loan company that has programs, I think, for a handful of upper Midwest states, but it'll be a 2-part loan where one loan will be for the value of the tax credit that will have a lump sum balloon payment at the end of 1 year. So theoretically, we'll file for taxes, we'll get that money back, and it goes right to them. And then the rest of it can be financed anywhere from 10 to 20 years. And even at, I think, 12 years, we would be about $75 less than our current electric bill.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
Once you put all of that together, it's kind of a no-brainer thing to do for us.
You just have to build this building now to put it on.
Yep, and worked that out with Dad, got his usage for equipment figured out, and got space for my father-in-law's camper and figured out where the shop's going to go. So now it's slowly accumulating building material as it's found for good prices.
So Andrew Grace recently covered the subject of post-frame construction and fine home building, and he bought laminated poles. Is that something you're expecting to do also?
I'm going to look into it. They're a pretty big upcharge on regular 6x6s, so I don't know if I'll be able to justify it, but his article was really great and kind of helped me clear some of my thought process on it.
The other thing he did that may be of note to listeners is he didn't put the post directly in concrete. He uses these steel brackets that are kind of U-shaped to hold the posts. Is that something you're also considering?
Yeah, I'm considering that because I would like to be able to do this in phases so that it's not my dad and I needing to hammer this thing out in 2 weekends because he's got to store his gravity box wagons in a month when it starts to snow. So I like the idea of getting it laid out, putting the concrete piers in, setting those post brackets like he did, and then being able to do this over time.
Alternatively, if you pour the post footings, you got to have everything ready and do it all at once, I think is what you're describing. Yeah. Well, our first question comes from John in Centerville, Maryland. Hello, FHB podcasting gurus. As I've listened to your informative banter for the past 3+ years, you have inspired and motivated me to tackle many issues on my energy hog 1990s era home in Maryland. As a result, I am well on the way to becoming a full-fledged energy retrofit nerd. Thank you. I don't know if I'd be thanking us for that. On episode 448, you extensively discussed preventing moisture transfer into homes from foundation footers. Well, I have a question of how to address that issue in a retrofit situation. My basement walls are constructed of hollow concrete block, and at the top of the wall, interior of the mud sill, there is a 3-inch to 3.5-inch opening where the blocks are exposed. Presumably, it's open all the way down to the footers and a pathway for moisture and critters into the basement. In an effort to tighten up my entire building envelope, I'm in the process of air sealing the basement and have not been able to find a detail to effectively seal the top of a concrete block foundation wall. What would you recommend? One solution I considered is fastening strips of zip sheathing over still seal foam to the top of the exposed block, then taping or using canned spray foam to fill any remaining cracks. Thoughts? On a separate note, there aren't many people who would care to listen to me brag about my crawl space encapsulation. My family will back me up on this. So because I think you might care, I have attached some before and after photos of my Christmas break project. I encapsulated and air sealed the crawl space and added a dehumidifier like Kylie's. Thanks for humoring me, and thanks for all you do to further the gospel of building science to the masses. John, Centerville, Maryland. Well, thanks, John. That's great. What do you guys think? Sealing the top of a block wall. Should we worry about this? Should we fix this?
I think he's right to think that it's a critter area, and I would use the really expensive concrete tape sold by either Sega or Proclima. You can get
put it right on the block?
Put it right on the block. Just clean it. Make sure that you do it on a relatively dry day so it's not damp. But you don't need to prime it with anything to get it to stick. I use the tape on my house. I've used it on other builds. It's really high quality stuff, and it would keep it air sealed and keep the critters out of your basement if they can get into the block walls somehow.
What do you think, Andrew?
So I didn't actually look at the photos, but I like the idea of a tape, having spent a lot of time air sealing my own basement. Tape is less messy than foam. And similarly, I think I've got a few spots where the top of my concrete block foundation is visible at the rim joist, and I've just been doing rigid foam with canned foam around the edges to seal those.
Do you have thoughts on this, Jeff?
Not really. I don't have any experience with the block foundation like that.
I think any one of these ways is fine, but you just want to stop that transpiration of moisture, right? And it's, going to be convective moving up through the block. So I think anything can do to seal off the top of it. I don't know, but if you're looking to stop critters, is tape gonna stop mice and rodents and stuff?
I've been told by the manufacturer reps that it will.
Because their little faces stick to it.
It's like it's a heavier tape too. It's almost like a fleece tape. So I'm not sure that it's the easiest thing for a critter to chew through, but proof would be in practice, I guess.
Well, I can tell you that the durability of the tapes is quite impressive. Carol fixed her gardening glove blown out finger with some air sealing tape recently, and it went through the wash. It worked for hours, and it's incredible how well that stuff sticks.
I've seen a few zip tape repaired vehicles lately. I saw one that had the back window blown out, and the whole back window was zip tape. I can't believe I didn't send you that picture. But it was pretty great, and it was clear that it was a permanent repair.
More than once, and I'm thinking it's been at least a half a dozen times. I've seen builders with their puffy coats or Carhartt coats patched with air sealing tape, and it seems to last a long time. It's fantastic.
I want to say the vest Josh was wearing at Pro Talk Live had a piece of tape on it sealing something.
Oh, it's so good. All right, John. I think this is a good thought. I don't know how you're going to stop the moisture transmission through the rest of the wall, but I think having those holes filled in the top will definitely help. If anyone has any ideas out there, I'd love to hear it. How to solve this problem easily. Okay. Hey, FHB podcast. I have a grassy area next to an existing 3-season covered / screen porch where I'd like to build an approximately 200 square foot deck or patio. There isn't much of a step down from the patio to grade. I think I'd have an issue having a deck with 2x6 joists meet the screen porch evenly. The deck seems like it would be too tall. I like the idea of a paver patio, but my back doesn't. I like the ease of stamped concrete, but my wallet doesn't. Do you have any thoughts on building a deck with multi-deck rubber deck? This seems like an ideal solution. I could use a sod cutter to remove the top layer of lawn, grade it, put down a geotextile fabric and gravel, then use the deck bases and Trex decking to make a quick deck. This assembly could be close to level with the existing screen porch and not as heavy / fussy as pavers. Do you think this deck would hold up over time with respect to rot? I think composite decking and rubber bases over gravel would be solid, but I'd like your input. Would a deck like this support an outdoor kitchen island? My thought is just have extra bases under the island so the load flows directly down to the gravel base. Okay, who wants to go first on this multi-deck rubber deck?
So my initial thought is if you're excavating, a bunch of soil already, just excavate enough to build a deck with 2x6 joists. I feel, I don't know anything about rubber deck base, but that, doing it right the first time is...
You never regret.
You never regret. Also, if you're thinking about selling your house at some point in the future, a wooden deck likely would be better than something that feels less permanent.
Well
Ian?
said.
Yeah?
I think it's using those rubber pads sounds like a really good idea until you realize how many of them you would need to support Trex, because it needs a lot more support than like a pressure treated decking. Maybe it would work with that, but I still think you're going to be into it for a pretty massive expense of those rubber footers. But I would say as soon as you commit to digging, just dig a little further.
And I'm going to say dig and then put the paver patio down. So I like that we have a variety of opinions on this subject.
One option too would be to pour a rat slab of concrete and then do the deck on top of that. If you really wanted something of a more solid base, then that wouldn't have to be all that fussy of work.
What about frost heaving though? I mean, you can't just like put this thing on the ground, right? In most places.
Why do you say pavers, Patrick?
Because I don't think you should have a deck that close to grade. You need air circulation. If it's gonna not line up to your existing, why do it? I don't know. Jeff, you're going to be the tiebreaker here.
I'm with you on pavers. I think otherwise it's going to just be a swamp underneath there, I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And I think it's an opportunity to rent some heavy equipment, like a skid steer loader or a Terramite backhoe, or just make sure you know where your utilities are before you start playing around with that stuff. Ask me how I know.
If you're going to rent a backhoe, then you guess you should talk about an addition to the screen porch. Why stop at making this a discussion?
Yeah, put in a
about
proper
pavers
foundation and
decking?
expand your house.
Yeah. I think we've happened upon the perfect solution to this.
At some point, though, he should total up his expense, because I bet paying a contractor to do stamped concrete is going to come in pretty close by the end of it once he adds everything up.
That's pretty, I mean, it's not inexpensive, but it's fast, which makes the labor costs lower, right? It's like a day's work, not days of work. I think that's true. What do you guys think of stamped concrete? I hear all kinds of varied opinions on it. I think it's pretty cool. Some folks just don't like it at all because they don't like that it's trying to be something it's not.
I'm in that camp of let concrete be concrete. You know, it doesn't bother me if it looks like concrete.
Yeah. What do you think, Ian?
I think there's a lot of options out there design-wise. I do agree with Andrew that the ones that are trying to look like weathered oak plank or something never quite get all the way there. But, cobblestone pattern with somebody that's good at dyeing concrete and coloring it up, I think can look pretty cool in the right application.
What do you think, Jeff? I know we've seen all kinds of it in Las Vegas at the Builders Show, right?
It's fun. Well, I don't get to look around that much when we're there.
Yeah.
I'm not really that familiar with it, but I know that doing some dyed concrete and things like that can look really pretty good, but that's mostly for indoor applications.
Do they even allow it in the gated communities that you guys live in Connecticut?
No, it has to be granite pavers.
But the gardener takes care of it, so it's all right.
This next question comes from Dave. It's a long one, so bear with me, everybody. Hello, Patrick and FHP podcast crew. Do you really want to see versions of spreadsheets? I took David Gerstel's outline from his Nail Your Numbers book and combined some of what Sean Van Dyke offered into one big spreadsheet amalgam. It took some heavy lifting given my skill set, but the end result works for me. The big intention I was aiming for was entering numbers as few times as possible for the same item, what Gerstel calls wearing out your numbers. Wherever I could make cells reference other cells across different sheets. Wherever I could, I made cells reference other cells across different sheets. This way, assuming I got the entry right in the first place, it auto-populates wherever that same number is relevant. It even compiles a financially detailed proposal that I can deliver to the client with only the addition of a narrative. Scope of work, which I prefer to write on a project-by-project basis, as it allows me to add a personal touch to an otherwise dry proposal. This, coupled with intense labor data tracking, has dramatically reduced the time I spend on estimating while producing more accurate estimates to clients. Wow, Dave, that is the gold standard of estimating. I think Ian would agree. He says, I've been making a new spreadsheet for smaller jobs. The one I use is good for jobs above 15 to 20,000 where clients want a somewhat more granular amount of information. Smaller than that, I've gotten pushback from clients. Why am I paying for general requirements? This isn't the same some big commercial job who are really looking only for a single cost item and maybe only a modestly detailed scope of work. They'll point out that plumbers, for example, just give a single price. I'll counter that the plumber most definitely has charged them for their general requirements, they just aren't showing it. This gets blank stares and mute mouths with glints of understanding hidden in their eyes. Even as I write this, it occurs to me that there's no right answer. Transparency versus simple clarity. Some people require the former, some people the latter. I use Google Sheets to handle all of this for me. I hear it's nearly the same as Excel, but it was free for many years until I eventually eclipsed the data storage, and now I pay a small monthly fee for the service. I'd be happy to share if you're curious. It strikes me as overwhelming and intensely fascinating to be in your shoes, where maybe a lot of folks are sharing their spreadsheets with you. It's a complex and individual snapshot of a person's brain in some ways. Love the podcast as always, and the magazine has begun to produce articles that give me great insight just before I tackle a similar project. For years, the articles seemed to be published just after I had done a similar job, causing much head slapping and lamentations of how much more efficient I could have done a thing, etc. Cheers, Dave. Dave, that was a great letter. Thank you. Sadly, we are not getting inundated with spreadsheets. I want to let everyone know.
At least interesting
Dave,
spreadsheets
though.
like this one. Yeah.
It's cool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see it because I know that book well. Reading it kind of changed my career trajectory, and David Gerstel's been a great mentor of mine for the last 4 or 5 years, and always has patience for my weird emails to him and phone calls and talking me through things that I'm trying to figure out. But he's a fascinating guy to get to know.
What I remember you saying, Ian, is that you too try and have things auto-populate whenever possible, right? That's got to be a huge time savings.
Yeah. I've been dabbling with some new house spreadsheets where you just put in the perimeter and wall heights and things like that, and amount of window openings, and have it shoot you out a reasonable budget for what the house would cost.
I'm guessing, though, the risk is that if you get the number wrong in one place, it's going to keep using
Compounding.
it. Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me, has that happened to you and your spreadsheets?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a constant chasing down of why things don't quite make sense, but it's also knowing the background of the numbers and not just trusting the output of your spreadsheet.
I mean, is the goal to have things average out, or do you really want rock solid numbers in every cell?
I think you want to try and get to a point where you have rock solid numbers in every cell, but it gets to be difficult. One thing that I added to my version of Dave's spreadsheet is a cost of goods database where I can update all the cost of goods of everything that we use for that job. So it's up to the moment, especially when you don't know if a pre-cut 2x4 is going to cost you $6 or $12. You want to be able to go in there and adjust that and then have that auto-populate all the way through. It sounds like a lot of work until you get used to talking to spreadsheets, and becomes less work the more you understand how they're set up. But we use Google Sheets for everything here at TDS, and previously I've used Excel, and they do transfer back and forth with most
Minimal glitches, right?
Yeah, minimal glitches.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very interesting to hear folks write in about doing this work, because I think y'all would agree it's how you're either successful or not in the business. At least it's one component.
Yeah, and it's important to understand how those work. There's a lot of boilerplate stuff out there and programs that you can use that will give you an 80% correct answer 70% of the time or something like that. And it's better to have the full grasp of what you're doing, in my opinion.
What do you do about the 20% you don't get right? I mean,
well, that's why I don't like those programs, which are more, like you said, averaging things out over time. But part of it too is trying to get away from the builder cost plus a fixed percentage that covers your overhead and profit as a model for pricing projects, and doing it a little bit more dynamically about what it actually costs you to produce a given project, instead of just using a blanket percentage number.
it's somewhat unrelated, but it seems to be in the same conversation is, have you discerned a price increase amongst the cost of goods you mentioned earlier in the last year or so? Is it a percentage you could identify?
Yeah, I have my own Dow Jones style basket of goods that I price every month, and then it gives me the remodeling goods average number. And I've been tracking that, I want to say, since maybe September of 2021. So I have a spreadsheet that tracks that, and it's interesting to watch that number move. The recent raise in gas prices and diesel prices, which I have in there, really made it skew in an
higher.
upward. Yeah, it made it skew a lot higher than maybe it really was in practice, especially for a company like ours that works in a small geographic area.
What is the percentage, Ian, do you recall, with the average of your monitored goods?
I have it.
I'll let you look that up, and we'll get to
screen.
Bongo 30's question. As per our Manual J calculation, we need approximately 1.5 tons of cooling power per floor in our build. We're looking at carrier variable speed models, but the smallest size is 2 ton. Are there any brands at all that offer central air conditioner units for ducted systems that are less than 2 tons? Thank you, Bongo 30. This was posted on Green Building Advisor. So before we get to that, did you come up with your figure?
Yeah, so my first one, my index average was a 37, and that was back in April of 2021. And then that has oscillated up to as high as 49, and it currently sits at 45. And this is the average of a pre-cut 2x4, a 16-foot 2x10 structural grade, a 16-foot PT 2x10, half-inch OSB, 3/4-inch subfloor, and then PVC pipe, copper pipe, Romex, EMT conduit, concrete at a ready mix yard, concrete for an 80-pound bag, and then gas and diesel. And it's just an average of those unit numbers. But
And it's almost 50% increase is what I heard.
Across the board, yeah. I mean, it's right now, the high point that I've had for 3/4-inch underlayment is $100. It dropped to 50. Now it's back up to 75.
And these are all commodity things we should point out. You know,
correct.
These are going to go up and down.
That's my reason for tracking them. Although ready mix yard concrete has surprisingly remained pretty consistently priced in our area, but just even 80-pound bag of ready mix from Home Depot's anywhere from $417 to $520 in my.
That seems like what that should cost, right?
Yeah, it's just surprising that it could change by $1 over time.
What is the rate for a yard of concrete from a ready mix plant? Is it $100?
170 right now.
Whoa!
But that's you're off the street. I think a concrete contractor who buys a lot gets a bit better of a rate than that.
So do we have this available as a ticker on your website?
I should. It should be a scrolling ticker. I should probably do it weekly at this point.
I was going to say we could put a ticker on Fine Homebuilding, but we're going to need daily updates. So.
Yeah, right.
I think we need some kind of acronym too. That commodities index.
Yeah, as the Dave said in his letter, they give you an interesting glimpse inside the mind of the person who puts them together.
I think that's true. I mean, it talks about how you analyze things, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So do we have an answer for Bongo 30 regarding a less than 2-ton variable capacity air conditioning or heat pump? And I want to say that you can buy a 1.5-ton Mitsubishi, right?
Yeah, he's talking about one that works for a regular forced air system, correct?
Yeah, central air handler deal.
Yeah. So I took a quick look on all of the HVAC direct to you kind of websites where I bought a lot of my stuff, and one of the websites has about 24 different options for 1.5 tons. I don't know enough to know the difference between some of the coils that they're talking about, but they do exist, and they seem to be all priced in that 1,200 to 2,000 range.
It's weird. I did a little research on this subject not too long ago, and the mainstream manufacturers largely do stick to 3 to 5 tons, or 2 to 5 tons, like 2 to 5 tons. And, low load houses, that's too much.
Yep.
And the turn down ratios are not as much as mini splits or ducted mini splits. So, somebody might argue that it's fine because these things are turned down to lower capacities, but they don't work as well in that operating mode.
I think that is an important consideration. That's a big push for the Mitsubishi Hyperheat ones, like I have in my house, where they can operate at that very low power draw to keep your house conditioned.
Yeah, and it's been demonstrated. Most importantly, makes you more comfortable than having these big swings of equipment running for a short period and then not, especially in cooling season.
Yeah.
You don't get any dehumidification, which is a big problem, especially where you guys are.
Right. Which is why the Mitsubishi ones have a separate dehumidification cycle. So it will cool just by virtue of removing the humidity from the space, but it can run without the AC coil to dehumidify.
So before we go, any time frame for building your post frame barn, Ian?
It's probably going to be in the fall, but first I'm going to do a small timber frame garden shed for Sarah, which will have like a lean-to greenhouse on one side and a lean-to storage on the other. I did the SketchUp model for it over the weekend and got the approval from the boss that that's what she wants it to look like. But I do have to get the full-blown building permit for it and go through the process. So being the practical Midwesterner that I am, I want to permit both of them at the same time and only go through the process once.
Oh, that's smart.
So, I have to put together my site plan and a set of drawings for each. But we're all settled on what both of them are going to look like. That was an important consideration. And more importantly, we drove around this weekend and looked at the color combinations of all of the metal-clad sheds in our area and decided to just go with black and white to match our house instead of picking out some fun color.
Maybe we do our podcast live and we do like an old fashioned barn racing at your house, Ian.
So cool.
That would be fun. Yeah, Sarah could roast a pig too.
Yeah,
that would be so awesome.
Patrick, pack your bags.
I'm ready. Oh yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, anytime.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thanks to Ian, Andrew, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building.